So if you've been following me for a while, you might know that I've been using my iPhone or some variation of an iPhone as my main camera and some variation of an iPad Pro as my main editing computer. And one of the biggest questions I get is, how do I do that? What kind of workflow does it look like? What software do I use? What hardware do I use? And how efficient is it all really? So in this video, I'm gonna break it all down step by step. And I figure since we're about to start a new year, I really wanna show off just how powerful what you have in your pocket and what you have around you really is. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So as you can see by the thumbnail or by the title of this video, this is an all Apple setup. So everything that I use from beginning to end involves an Apple product, either software or hardware. So that's definitely something that you're gonna have to take into consideration. But all you absolutely truly need is an iPhone, and everything else is just kind of an auxiliary or something that adds a little bit more value over time. But you definitely wanna have some sort of iPhone that's running the latest version of iOS, and then if you can, an iPad after the fact to help you out with that. But let's start off with exactly what I use in the very beginning and how I go from creating an idea all the way to publishing a video on YouTube. And to start off, it all starts off in the Apple Notes application. That's usually where I brainstorm everything, and now with the inclusion of 18.2, the writing tools, ChatGPT integrations, it just gets that much more accessible and a lot less prohibitive because now I have access to something like ChatGPT built in natively into my OS. So basically what I do is I write down a couple of video ideas, see what's out there in terms of news, maybe new products that are coming in, and then I write them down in my Notes application. I start to jot down some extra notes on exactly what ideas I want to do. So for instance, for a specific example, when it comes to, let's say, something like a new beta drop, right? A new iOS update just came out and I need to write down exactly what those new features are that came out. I'll list everything out in my notes application, and then with 18.2, I'm able to use something like the writing tools to really help me summarize things, make them a little bit more legible, kind of turn it into a script a little bit, and make it just a little bit easier to read and a little bit more flowy. Maybe I like to change the tone and the tonality of exactly what I'm saying, but for the most part, I just kind of work off of bullet points. I don't really script things through, which could be obvious depending on who you are and how I'm talking in this video. And of course, most, if not all of my source material does come from 9to5Mac, so I do highly recommend going there first if you want the latest news and the most up-to-date news and usually the most accurate news when it comes to Apple. But once I have my video idea and my talking points down, I then move over to this little set that I have right here. I have my separate desk over here, which is where most of my work gets done, my ideation, and then when it comes to setting up all the actual hardware that I use, like I mentioned, I'm using an iPhone 16 Pro Max as my main camera, which is exactly what I'm using right now to talk to you, and then I use my M4 iPad Pro as not only the editing machine, which we'll get to in a second, but also as my viewfinder, and this has been the newest part of my workflow that has helped out immensely when it comes to actually setting this all up and getting it done correctly. So I will say that I use LumaFusion as my main editor, but I've recently started using Final Cut Pro, and it's for one real reason and one feature specifically, and that feature alone to me is worth the $5 per month or the $50 a year for the subscription. But again, you do not need this. This just helps me out from a visual standpoint. So with Final Cut Pro, what I end up doing is I'll set up my camera, and I've actually started using the application Final Cut Camera on the actual iPhone as well as Final Cut Pro on my M4 iPad for this specific use case. So I like to line myself up and use my Final Cut Pro multicam setup as a viewfinder to see exactly what my iPhone is seeing right in front of me. So that's very easy to set up. It's all recognized. It's all done through the same Apple ID. So as long as you're on the same Wi-Fi and you're on the same Apple ID, this is a seamless and extremely seamless integration because all I do is open up the Final Cut camera, open up Final Cut Pro, and then automatically I'm able to see exactly what's coming from my iPhone over on my iPad Pro. Now, as I mentioned, this is a new development in my workflow. I've only been doing this for about 2 or 3 months, but I like it because A, Final Cut Camera allows me to see what I'm doing in Final Cut Pro with my iPad. I can line things up, I can set the focus, I can set the exposure, and I can just get a little bit more nuance when it comes to all the settings. Now, before that, what I was doing, which is still a very viable option, is to use your Apple Watch as a viewfinder with a regular camera application. Now, I did use that pretty much for the better part of 5 years, using different iPhones and different versions of the Apple Watch, and it worked for the most part okay. There were some things that were kind of annoying. Sometimes it would take a little while to set up. Sometimes I would have to quit out of both the camera app and the remote app on the Apple Watch, and sometimes it would just kind of take a little bit of time. And for the most part on the Final Cut side, every single time it's worked and it's worked flawlessly. The second thing that was kind of an annoyance or a hindrance and kind of a guessing game that would just waste time for me is that the actual microphone. So my microphone setup, I have the SM7, the Shure SM7, and that's wired directly into my iPhone via USB-C. And sometimes the way that that USB-C cable is looked at or recognized on the iPhone, it doesn't treat it as a microphone, it treats it as headphones. So sometimes I'll record using the regular camera app and then my voice won't be picked up, it'll just be kind of muted and there won't be any sound, which again is a huge time waster. With the Final Cut camera application, you can actually go into the settings and select what your microphone is, and the Shure mic does show up every single time, so I haven't had that situation occur with the Final Cut camera, and again, it can all be managed as a viewfinder from your iPad with Final Cut camera in the multicam setup. And again, that is the only reason why I'm using Final Cut Pro on the iPad. I try to use Final Cut Pro as my only editing machine, but again, it's just not really there. It's very watered down. The settings are all messed up. There's still a lot missing, especially compared to LumaFusion. So once I'm done recording and I'm done using the Final Cut Pro app at that specific situation, then what I'll do is I'll unplug my microphone, plug in one of my SSDs. I usually use a T7 Shield, T9, or my Lexar SSD. They're all great SSDs. I'll link them all down below if you guys want to check them out. But the USB-C inclusion on the new iPhones and the iPhone 15s has been one of the best things to happen for my personal workflow and my efficiency's sake. So what I will do is I'll plug it in, then I'll offload all that footage from the Final Cut camera application on my iPhone over to the SSD and manage it in my file system. I'll create a folder and I have a bunch of different folders for all the different footage that I do, and then I'll be good to go. So now once I'm done recording, I'm done offloading the footage, I now move over to my M4 iPad Pro and move over to LumaFusion. Now LumaFusion allows you to work off an SSD, so does Final Cut Pro, but the file management system in Final Cut Pro is, for the lack of a better term, horrendous in my opinion. So using something like LumaFusion makes it a little bit easier to navigate all those different file systems, and you aren't tied up to just one project. But all I do is I plug in my SSD directly into my iPad Pro, open up LumaFusion, and I already have it installed, so basically it already recognizes my Lexar SSD as an SSD that I work off of, so that's very easy to use. And once that's all set up, it's just a matter of creating a new project and starting to import all those different files and those clips into my timeline. If you guys do want a walkthrough on how to use LumaFusion a little bit more in-depthly and maybe talk about exactly the ins and outs and how I personally edit, let me know in the comment down below and maybe we'll create a video kind of reviewing LumaFusion in totality and all the different features. But this video is more so about my workflow. I just do love LumaFusion, and I've been using LumaFusion since 2018 now at this point, going on 7 years, as my main editor. So again, kudos to LumaFusion for always evolving and always updating itself, and that's just something that I love to see. So now, once I'm done editing, I can do one of two things. I can either upload it directly to YouTube, directly from LumaFusion, or what I do in my personal workflow, just because it's a little easier for me, is I actually export the entire video into that same Lexar SSD. Once that's exported, and exports extremely quickly on the M4 iPad Pro, and then take that SSD and plug it into my Mac computer. Now, this is not a necessary step. This is just what I'm personally used to, what I like to do. I plug it into my new M4 Mac Mini, and then I upload it to YouTube from my Mac Mini as opposed to something from my iPad. You can definitely import it directly into the YouTube Studio app. You can definitely import it directly from LumaFusion, and you can definitely import it directly from Safari in YouTube Studio in the iPad. But I just personally prefer to upload it in YouTube Studio, but on my macOS computer, and that's just something that I've been used to. So once that's done, I upload it, do all my admin stuff like the description, the thumbnails. That's another thing. I use Affinity Photo 2 on my M4 iPad Pro to create my thumbnails. And also shout out Michael Bauer for always helping me out with those thumbnails, which has been an immense help. But that is my entire workflow from beginning to end. And I use all things Apple related, all things Apple hardware when it comes to getting that stuff done. And like I mentioned, you really only need an iPhone because the microphones for the most part are good enough, especially if you're in a soundproofed environment and there isn't a lot of echo. So if you have carpet and some soundproofing panels, you really don't need this Shure mic. The Shure mic definitely helps, and it's a great microphone, especially at the price point that it's at, and it has helped out my content. But if you're starting and you're making your first video ever, your iPhone is going to be more than enough to get it done, especially because most editors, especially something like LumaFusion, you can isolate your voice. So if there is an echo, you can just isolate your voice during your edit to make that sound as if you are using a direct microphone. And also the microphones on the 16 Pro Max and even older iPhones are still great even at a distance, so you do not need external microphones to get that done. So if you are going to spend money on anything, maybe your lighting, especially if you are shooting in a dark environment, because lighting is key when it comes to iPhone videography. The better your lighting, the better it's going to look in iPhone video. If you have great lighting, then the iPhone video is pretty much unmatched. It pretty much matches something that's a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 camera, and it's all built into your iPhone. But that is, from beginning to end, like I mentioned, my YouTube studio setup. That's exactly how I edit my videos, how I film these videos, and to give you guys a rundown of the software and hardware that I'm using. On the hardware side, I have my 16 Pro Max as my video camera. I have my M4 iPad Pro as my editing machine for both videos and thumbnail creation. I have this Shure microphone, like I mentioned, that I've been using for now 3 years, so it was a great investment. I have a small rig light that I use as my one and only light. I just have a light behind me that I picked up from IKEA for about 20 or 30 bucks, and that's my hair light behind me. I have a couple other lights to my left over here, which are by Kyuksu that were, nicely sent to me, which I do believe are about $60, but that's there mostly for aesthetic purposes, just to give you guys an idea of what I'm using from a hardware perspective. And then I just have pretty much like Amazon tripods that I've built up over the last couple years that are anywhere from $50 to $200 in order to be able to have a tripod for my iPhone camera. And then from a software side, I use a Notes application, which is absolutely free to kind of ideate and do stuff like that. I use things that are already built into Apple Intelligence, like the ChatGPT integration to help with that ideation a little bit. I use LumaFusion, which is a one-time purchase of anywhere from 20 to 40 bucks, depending on what time of the season it is. And then I've been using the Final Cut Camera application, and Final Cut Camera is a free application. Final Cut Pro is what allows me to use the iPad as a viewfinder, and that is $5 a month, or I believe $50 a year, depending on what you want to do. And like I mentioned, the only reason I use Final Cut Pro is for the viewfinder, and if you just want to save your money and you have an Apple Watch, the viewfinder on the regular Apple Watch is more than enough, especially in the beginning. It's going to work enough times. It just started kind of knock into my efficiency a little bit by having to reset it over and over again. But again, if you're just starting off, make your first 10, 15, 20 videos with that situation before you start spending money, and that's just my personal recommendation. But that will just about do it for this video, everybody. As you saw, it's a very simple setup. It's very easy to do. I use what I have around me, and I've been using iPhone cameras since I believe 2014, and I think that was iPhone 7 back then. If you guys ever want to see my first ever video, it's still up on YouTube on a separate channel. I'll even link it down below for you guys to check it out. Again, that was back in 2014. It was a different time. I was a little bit more monotone back then. But all in all, I've been a big advocate of using what you have around you. The iPhone camera is the best camera that you're going to have in your pocket for most cases. So just use that in the very beginning. And then if you do want to upgrade after the fact and you see some value in upgrading, then maybe it is worth it. But to this point, even 10 years later, the iPhones for me are still the best thing to do. And if anything, I actually have a second iPhone that I prefer to buy versus a dedicated camera because they're just easier to use and they work in my workflow so well. But that'll do it, everybody. If you made it to the end, leave a little dolphin in the comments down below so I know you made it to the end. If you're going to start a channel, let me know with a comment down below what that channel name is, and I'll check it out to see exactly what's going on. But if you guys want to watch more videos like this one, definitely check out one of these videos right here. And until next time, I'm Fernando, and I'm out of here, everybody. Peace.